December 15th, 1965. A packed concert hall in Texas, every seat taken, aisles jammed with people who came to see Certainty on stage. Johnny Cash is untouchable now. I Walk the Line, Ring of Fire, hit after hit. Black suit, calm voice. A man who looks like nothing can shake him. Then, during the third song, something breaks. Cash stops singing mid-line. No dramatic chord. No announcement. He stares past the crowd as if the room has vanished. Slowly, deliberately, he unhooks the guitar from his shoulder and places it on the stage floor. He turns and walks behind the curtain. No words, no explanation. 2,000 people freeze. You can hear chairs creak. Someone coughs and immediately regrets it. The band keeps playing for a few confused seconds, then dies with the sound. Organizers rush backstage. Is it part of the show? A heart attack? Drugs? A breakdown happening in real time? The curtain drops. By morning, newspapers will call it the strangest moment of Cash's career. Rumors will spread for years. But the real reason Johnny Cash walked off that stage, the real thing he saw in the audience, will stay buried for 18 years. And when it finally comes out, it will change the meaning of that silence forever. Let us know where you're watching from, and we hope you enjoy the story. In 1963, Ring of Fire stayed at #1 for 7 straight weeks. To the public, it looked like Certainty. The black suit, the steady voice, the Columbia deal. The kind of success that makes promoters talk as if a man has become unbreakable. The road said otherwise. 200 shows a year meant buses over southern back roads, motels with neon buzzing through thin curtains, and nights where the band ate whatever was still open. In some towns, whites-only signs still hung in windows, and the tension rode with them. Columbia wanted new releases every 3 or 4 months, another single, another session, because radio didn't care if a singer's body was lagging behind the schedule. At home in California, Vivian raised 4 little girls who learned to measure their father in phone calls. Johnny would appear for 2 or 3 days, try to be gentle, then leave again with a suitcase and a promise. He carried a private shame, that the crowd knew his name better than his daughters did. In Nashville in 1964, a doctor offered a practical fix. Dexedrine for energy on tour. 5 milligrams in the morning. 10 by midday when the bus turned into a furnace and the miles blurred. The pills hit fast. A metallic taste, a bright edge to the world, a heart that refused to slow. He told himself it was discipline, not a trap. By autumn 1965, the numbers were ugly. 20, sometimes 30 tablets a day. He could go 3 or 4 nights without sleep, then crash so hard he'd vanish for 14 hours and wake up unsure of the city. Cameras caught his hands shaking during interviews, so he gripped cups with both palms. In half a year, his weight dropped from about 85 kilos to 71. On stage, he sometimes lost lyrics he'd sung 1,000 times and patched the holes with half lines, eyes fixed above the crowd. That fall, his manager Saul Holiff quietly canceled 15 dates and blamed fatigue. In Oklahoma that November, backstage, an older man waited until the corridor cleared. He was small, near 60, and he introduced himself as James McRae. From his wallet, he produced a creased photo of a young soldier. "My son died in Korea in '53, he said, without drama. "Your records are the only thing that keeps me upright." Johnny looked at the boy's face and felt the air drain from the room. For a split second, it wasn't McRae's son at all. It was Jack, his brother, back in 1944, before the sawmill accident that split their family and left Johnny with a question he never stopped hearing. Why weren't you there? Johnny couldn't answer the old man. He only nodded. McRae tucked the photo away and walked off, leaving Johnny with a silence louder than the crowd. After that, Jack's face started appearing everywhere. Hotel mirrors, the front row, the glare of stage lights. Johnny pushed more pills to outrun it, and the pills sharpened the fear instead. On December 3rd, in a phone booth with a cold receiver pressed to his ear, Vivian said she was filing for divorce. Johnny set his forehead against the glass. When he hung up, he cried for the first time in a decade, wiped his face, swallowed another tablet, and walked back toward the man the audience expected to see. Morning came without permission. At 8:30 a.m., Johnny Cash woke on a narrow motel bed 40 miles outside town. The place was called Starfall, though nothing about it fell softly. Neon leaked through the curtains like a warning light. His mouth tasted of old metal and sour bourbon. On the nightstand lay an empty whiskey bottle and a scatter of white pills, some crushed into the cheap laminate, as if he'd tried to grind them into the surface. He didn't remember checking in. He didn't remember the drive. In the mirror above the sink, a stranger stared back. Sunken eyes. Skin pulled tight over bone. He leaned closer, waiting for recognition to return. It didn't. When he reached into his jacket pocket, his fingers closed on folded paper. One line, written in his own blocky hand. "Don't do this." Jack wouldn't want it. He had no memory of writing it. The realization hit harder than the hangover. His chest tightened. If he didn't remember writing that note, what else had he done without knowing? By early afternoon, the bus rolled toward the venue. Marshall Grant drove, steady and quiet. The road hummed under worn tires. "We could skip tonight," Marshall said, not looking over. "People would understand." Johnny snapped back without thinking. 2,000 tickets sold. He wasn't going to be the man who walked away. Marshall nodded, but his voice stayed low. He reminded Johnny of the night 2 weeks earlier when Johnny had fallen asleep, standing up during a ballad, chin dropping to his chest while the band played on. The crowd thought it was part of the act. At 5, backstage smelled of dust and warm wood. A local promoter leaned in and spoke too softly. The old man was here again. James McRae. 3rd row, center. Johnny pulled the curtain back just enough to see him. McRae sat with the same photograph resting on his knees, hands shaking in a way Johnny recognized. Something in Johnny's stomach turned cold. The lights went down. The band stepped out. The first song held together. The second cracked. Words slipped away on the third verse, and Johnny patched the hole with instinct. On the third, a slow song about loss, he looked out and saw McRae crying openly. Then, 2 rows back, he saw a young woman beside a small girl. The child held a hand-painted sign. "Mr. Cash, you saved my daddy." Johnny stopped singing mid-line. The guitar slipped from his shoulder and thudded against his leg. He looked from the sign to the old man, then past them, as if something unseen had stepped between him and the crowd. 2,000 people fell silent. The quiet had weight. It pressed against his ears harder than applause ever had. He turned and walked off stage without a word. Behind him, the band kept playing for a few seconds, confused, until the truth reached them. The last sound the audience heard was the slow, deliberate knock of his boots on the wooden boards, moving away. At 9:30, the dressing room air felt used up. Johnny sat on a folding chair facing the wall as if the paint could hold him steady. His black shirt clung damp at the collar. Marshall hovered near the sink, helpless with his hands. The promoter kept opening the door a crack and shutting it again, listening to the rumble outside. 2,000 people turning anger into noise. No one could decide what to say, because any sentence would land on the same fact. Cash had vanished mid-song. A knock came, soft, then firmer. Before the promoter could block it, the older man stepped in. James McRae didn't ask permission. He simply looked at Johnny's back like he was reading a weathered sign. "Sir, you can't," the promoter began. "Leave us," Johnny said, voice flat. It surprised even Marshall. The room emptied until only the two of them remained, the door clicking shut. McRae spoke first. "You saw something out there, didn't you?" Johnny didn't turn. McRae's breathing was controlled, practiced. "I've been coming to your shows 1.5 years. After each one, I wait for the moment you don't get up. Tonight I thought, this is it. This is the night he drops." Johnny's jaw tightened. "Why would you watch for that?" "Because I've watched it before." McRae took the photograph from his wallet and held it out. "You looked at me like you recognized him." Johnny finally faced him, and the rage in his eyes was smaller than the exhaustion behind it. "You told me he died in Korea." McRae nodded once. He was there, wounded. The pain never stopped. They gave him morphine. Then they gave him more. His thumb rubbed the edge of the picture as if he could smooth the past. "Turn it over." Johnny flipped it. The handwriting on the back was neat and merciless. Tommy McRae, 1931 to 1953. Morphine overdose. Korean hospital. For a moment, Johnny's throat refused to work. He swallowed, felt the sharp taste of pills rising like bile. McRae's voice lowered. "I look at you, and I see my boy near the end, trying to stand straight, trying to be the man everyone expected, then losing the fight in private." He paused. "I didn't come to accuse you. I came because I don't want to watch another man disappear." The door opened later, after the promoter had coaxed the crowd toward refunds and exits. In a corridor lined with peeling posters, he pulled Marshall aside and explained what Johnny hadn't known. The woman with the child was the widow of a Vietnam lieutenant. In 1964, her husband had been ready to end his life, gun already in hand, when he heard "I Walk the Line" on the radio. Something in the steadiness of it snapped him back. He lived. He shipped out anyway. A year later, he was dead, leaving behind that little girl and the sign she'd made with a marker that still smelled fresh. Johnny sat alone after the building emptied, staring at his hands as if they belonged to somebody else. Two strangers had carried their dead into his audience, and he had carried his own. The next year didn't soften him. January 1966 brought handcuffs and a headline: 1,000 pills across the border. March meant court, a suspended sentence, and reporters counting his mistakes like change. He tried touring again. In June he collapsed in Dallas, lights spinning, body shutting down with no warning. By September, Vivian's divorce papers became real. In October, he vanished for days. When they found him in a Tennessee cave, he was half-conscious, lips cracked, eyes wild, as if he'd crawled into the earth to stop hearing his own thoughts. In November 1966, a letter arrived that didn't beg and didn't scold. It was from June Carter. One sentence, written plain: "You saved a life you never knew. Maybe it's time to save your own." Inside was a clipped obituary photo, an American soldier holding a small daughter. The child's face matched the sign from Texas. Johnny read it twice, then a third time slower, as if speed had been his enemy all along. January 1967 didn't arrive gently. It crept in at 3 a.m, with Johnny Cash sitting alone in his house in Tennessee. The letter from June Carter unfolded on the kitchen table. He read it again under a bare bulb, the paper trembling between his fingers. For the first time in months, he didn't reach for the bottle or the pills. He sat there and waited, as if endurance itself might answer him. 36 hours later, his body revolted. His hands shook so hard he couldn't lift a glass. His jaw locked, then unclenched in waves of pain. He made it to the sink just in time. When it became unbearable, he broke, swallowed 15 tablets at once, dry, without ceremony. Relief came fast and filthy. He leaned against the counter and hated himself for how quickly it worked. That night he dialed June's number. It was after 3. When she answered, he tried to speak, and couldn't. The sounds that came out weren't words. She stayed on the line for 40 minutes while he cried into the receiver, saying nothing useful, saying nothing at all. When his breathing finally slowed, she said only, "I'll be there in the morning." She didn't come alone. In February, June arrived with her mother, Maybelle Carter. Maybelle took one look at Johnny, his weight, his eyes, the way he stood as if bracing for a blow, and said quietly, "My husband drank himself to death by 40. I know what dying in pieces looks like." There was no sermon, just an offer. A month in Virginia, at her house, no phones, no managers, no pills. If after 30 days he wanted to go back to using, Maybelle said she'd buy them herself. Johnny agreed because he was too tired to argue. The first week was hell. He stayed locked in the spare room, sweating through sheets, vomiting until his ribs ached. He screamed in his sleep. June and Maybelle took turns sitting outside the door, listening, honoring his request to be left alone. On the 9th day, he came out, 48 kilos of will holding together a body down to 68 kilos. His beard was wild. His eyes, for the first time in a year, were awake. On the 12th day, Maybelle asked him to sit with her on the porch. She rocked gently, watching the trees move. "Tell me about the boy on the photograph," she said. Johnny didn't answer. She reached into his wallet, pulled out a faded picture of 2 brothers by a riverbank. "You call his name when you're sick," she said. "Jack, I'm sorry." Over and over. The story came out whole for the first time. May 8, 1944. He'd gone fishing instead of to the sawmill. Jack was 14. The blade caught him mid-shift. 9 days in the hospital. The last question, "Why weren't you there?" Maybelle waited until he finished, then asked his age. When he said 12, she let the silence work. "You were a child," she said finally. "You've been punishing that child for 23 years. She handed him a letter he'd never finished reading, his father's handwriting, dated 1958. Jack chose to go that day. I should have stopped him. This wasn't your burden to carry. Spring brought hope that felt fragile, but real. 2 sober months. A small club show that went clean. A new contract offer. In July, backstage in Dallas, an old acquaintance from the Army found him. Talk turned nostalgic, then dangerous. Dexedrine appeared, easy as a handshake. Johnny stood alone in a bathroom, pills in his palm, staring at a face he almost recognized. 5 minutes to showtime. 5,000 people waiting. The old pull surged, and for the first time, he didn't know which way he would fall. Johnny stood in the bathroom for 3 full minutes. The pills lay in the sink, chalk white against stained porcelain. Someone knocked once, then again. "Mr. Cash, 2 minutes." His hand hovered, shaking so hard the room seemed to tremble with it. Then he tipped the blister pack over, turned the faucet, and watched the tablets dissolve into cloudy water. When he walked on stage, his legs felt hollow, but they carried him. The show held. Afterward, the man from the Army met his eyes, understood, and left without a word. They never crossed paths again. August and September passed in a careful rhythm. 43 days without pills. His weight crept back toward 77 kilos. Mornings meant fishing lines cutting quiet water. Evenings meant long talks and church pews he hadn't touched in years. Columbia noticed the difference. Songs came slower, but truer. He believed briefly that discipline had finally learned his name. In September, a letter arrived from James McRae. The handwriting wavered. McRae wrote of hearing about Johnny's return and of a detail he'd forgotten to share. His son Tommy had carried a tattoo on his shoulder, a ribbon with the words, "Walk the Line." He'd gotten it after hearing Johnny on the radio in a hospital ward. Dates didn't add up. Tommy died before the song existed, but Johnny felt the meaning settle anyway. Music, he realized, lived outside calendars. It stayed where memory put it. Day 52 broke him. Driving alone at night, the radio read names from Vietnam. 47. One struck hard. Lieutenant David Collins, 24. Johnny pulled over, heart pounding, and thumbed through the notebook where he kept unanswered letters. Collins had written in March 1965 about fear, about home, about Johnny's songs being a lifeline. Johnny had never replied. He drove to the first pharmacy he saw and bought Dexedrine without a prescription. 10 pills went down with gas station coffee. He hid it well at first. June sensed something off and chose trust. By December, he needed 25 a day just to stand still. January 13th, 1968, Folsom Prison, looked like triumph from the outside. Inside, it was chaos. 40 pills on the hotel table, 20 gone before the bus. In a back room at the prison, he faced a wall, hands shaking so badly June held them between hers. He vomited before walking out. "Sing for them," she said. "They're broken too." He remembered only the first 2 songs. The rest came from somewhere he didn't visit. The album exploded. His body collapsed. By August, he hadn't slept in 5 days, driving Tennessee roads without aim. June drew a line he couldn't straddle. He chose flight. On October 22, 1968, he drove to Nickajack Cave. Night swallowed the entrance. He took a flashlight, a guitar, a flask. No food, no water, no pills. He went deeper than the markers, into 12-degree dark, where sound died. Time dissolved. He sang the lullabies Jack used to hum, clutching the guitar like a child holds breath. In the black, a voice came, young, familiar. "Johnny, you're going the wrong way." The light showed nothing. The voice returned, "Turn back. I can't go with you." He shouted questions into stone. The answer, real or not, cut clean. "You've lived in that Saturday for 23 years. Leave it." Hunger, thirst, withdrawal braided tight. He curled on cold rock and understood this wasn't suicide. It was surrendering choice. Let the cave decide. Somewhere far off, water fell. He didn't know how long he lay there. The flashlight had died. The dark was complete. No edge, no direction, no sound except his own breathing thinning out. His skin burned with cold. When he shifted, pain flared through joints that felt borrowed from someone else. Then, faintly, another sound threaded through the silence. Not a voice. Water. His body moved before his mind agreed. He crawled toward the drip, palms scraping stone until his fingers found a narrow runnel. The water was icy and metallic, but it shocked him awake. He drank until his stomach cramped and understood, with a clarity that startled him. He didn't want to die. Even here. Especially here. He stood and began the long work of leaving. One hand on the wall, counting steps without numbers, falling twice, skinning knees and tearing open a palm. At some point, the guitar slipped from his shoulder and stayed where it fell. He let it go. Hours later, 6, maybe more, a pin of light appeared, distant as a star. He stopped, afraid of what waited outside, then moved anyway. When he emerged into afternoon sun, the warmth felt violent. He dropped to his knees and cried until his chest hurt. A man found him 20 minutes later, a hunter with a lined face who didn't recognize him through the dirt and beard. "You fall in?" the man asked. Johnny shook his head. "I went in," he said, "to see if I wanted to come out." The man nodded, as if that made sense. "Name's Robert," he said. He showed a scar on his wrist and said he'd been in that cave after Korea, looking for an answer. He drove Johnny to a hospital without asking for more. The week blurred. Dehydration, infection, bandages. June arrived on the second day, eyes red, voice steady. She read psalms while Johnny listened, unable to speak, letting words pass through him like clean air. On the fourth day, a doctor came in and introduced himself. He had written the first Dexedrine prescription years earlier. He apologized and cried. Johnny told him the truth without mercy or blame. He had swallowed every pill himself. Home meant rules. Mornings at 6. Long walks. Early nights. June locked away every medicine, even aspirin, and the weight of that trust steadied him. Songs came slowly, stripped of speed and shine, but they stayed. He wrote letters he owed. He wrote apologies he didn't send. In December, he wrote James McRae about the cave, about Jack, about finally hearing the right question. A reply came from McRae's daughter weeks later. Her father had died. He'd asked her to say this. Brothers don't blame brothers for living. Johnny read it alone on the porch and let the grief finish its work. In February 1969, mid-song in a Canadian hall, he called June to the stage. His voice shook. He asked. She said yes. Soft at first, then loud enough to reach him. They married days later. Success followed without asking permission. So did letters. One came from the girl with the sign, now 10, dreaming of music. Johnny sent her a guitar and a note. Make your own sound. He kept walking, one day at a time, toward the light he'd chosen. The years after 1970 settled into something close to peace. Johnny stayed sober. He worked, toured, raised a son, learned the quiet discipline of ordinary mornings. Songs like Sunday Morning Coming Down carried the weight he once tried to outrun. Interviews came and went, and with them the same question, sharpened by time. What happened in Texas, December 1965? He always answered around it. I wasn't well. Personal reasons. It wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the truth. In 1978, a reporter pressed harder, asking if it had been an overdose. Johnny paused, long enough to make editors nervous. It was bigger than pills, he said. I'm not ready to explain. He meant he didn't know how to explain it yet. That changed in June 1983, after a show in Austin. A woman waited backstage, hands shaking. She introduced herself as Margaret McRae. Her father, James, had died years earlier. She'd driven across states to find Johnny because she'd discovered his letters among her father's things. He wanted you to see this, she said, and handed him a notebook. James McRae's journal began in 1964. Page after page traced a man following concerts like Stations of the Cross. One entry, dated December 16, 1965, stopped Johnny cold. He walked off stage tonight. He looked at me like he was seeing a ghost. I pray he stops before it's too late. Like my Tommy. Another entry followed weeks later. McRae had learned the name of the child with the sign Jennifer Collins. He'd written to her father, David, explaining addiction and warning him gently. David replied with thanks and a sentence that burned through the page. "Tell Johnny Cash he already saved me. Tell him to walk the line himself." Johnny frowned at the dates. In his memory, David Collins died in October 1967. The radio announcement that sent him spiraling. Margaret produced 2 obituaries from that same week. 2 men. Same name. Same age. Different lives. The radio had read them together. Johnny had heard the wrong death. Then she showed him one more thing. A letter written in March 1968, returned unopened because the address was wrong. It was from Sarah Collins, David's wife. She thanked Johnny for the song that stopped a suicide in 1965. She enclosed a photo of David holding a newborn daughter, Jennifer, and a line from his journal. "If he can hold the line, so can I." Johnny stood there holding proof that the man he thought he'd failed had lived 2.5 more years. Years of marriage, of fatherhood, because of a song. His collapse, his cave, his clawing back into light had been driven by a mistake. And yet the path it forced him down had led to Folsom, to letters he answered, to lives he never saw. Weeks later, on television, the question came again. This time he answered. He spoke of 3 faces in a crowd and a mirror he couldn't avoid. He said the song he needed to sing wasn't on the set list. It was Survival. When asked if he'd found it, he smiled. "I found a reason to keep looking." After his death, the quiet work continued. Guitars sent out each December. Children learned chords. One guitar remained untouched. A reminder, not a tool. The one left in the cave was found years later, carved with a message. "Jack, I came out." History calls that night in Texas the moment he stopped. The truth is simpler. That was the night he chose not to disappear, to keep walking, to hold the line.